Hi, everybody. Dr. Karen McElroy is here with us. She's in Australia, I'm in Florida, and she is a naturopath who is also a medical herbalist, as well as a SIBO patient herself. So we're going to be learning from her over these next several minutes, and I can't wait to find out her thoughts on the underlying causes of SIBO and what to do about it. Thank you, Dr. McElroy, for being here. Hello, hello.
Hey, thanks, Siobhan. Nice to be here.
I know it's very early there, so I appreciate your time. So tell us a little bit about how you're a SIBO patient and what did you think was, personal question, your underlying cause?
Yeah, sure. So SIBO for me, I think, came from more of a stress response, which I think is part of a lot of people's contributing factor. If it's not the solo contributor, it's definitely stress. I think is a huge part of that. I didn't actually have any other kind of confounding things going on at the same time that the SIBO developed. And I had it for a while before I kind of cottoned onto it, and I was treating SIBO and starting to notice that probably I had it. So eventually I found myself doing the test and going along with a whole lot of protocols, which of course, having a fairly stubborn case myself made it interesting for me to research more and more around both the causes and also, the treatment options as well.
So typically we don't hear that stress is like the direct underlying cause. And of course it's many, many things, but that might have been like the trigger to put it over the edge. But when you're saying stress, are you talking about like life's everyday stress, or are you talking about maybe like a death in the family, losing one's job? I mean, like a really serious, stressful situation. And I know it's a scale as well. So I just wanted to find out your take on that, because I think we're all stressed. So we're all, we all have the possibility of slowing our motility down because our central nervous system is overloaded.
Exactly.
And then what? Is there hope? My goodness, we're all so stressed. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think it's true. And I think that background level of stress is really common for so many people these days. We're all in what I call like a low-grade flight or fight a lot of the time, so that we don't have those long, luxurious off switches, I guess, where we can allow the body to heal and all those mechanisms that we know we need, is a big part of that. Reproduction and immunity, they're the three areas that I really see that fail, when we're under a lot of stress. I think if it's a driver for it, it probably is more of a big stress. For me, it was an extended period where I had a lot of stress with a new business and just working very long hours and that sort of thing, and some emotional stress at the time. But I just also find, stress is different for everyone, and it is one of those things that what stresses one person may not stress another. It is very individualized. So I think we have this backdrop, I suppose, where the digestion's often a little bit under innovated, if you like, because of the stress response. So we have this like sluggish kind of digestion that sits there all the time. We don't get good digestive enzymes being produced, and we're not absorbing our food so well. We haven't got good, strong the motility, etc., through the gut. So that sort of is like a predisposition, if you like, sitting there. And then it doesn't take many other things to come along to throw that out even more, And obviously, if we look at bacterial infections as maybe, or viral infections as one of the driver for SIBO as well, you've got that compounding thing where if you're under stress, your immunity is lower, you don't have that same ability to fight off bacterial infections as well. So they all kind of feed in, it's not one thing or the other.
So tell me about the herbal protocol that you do. Here in the States, we have, the berberine complex, the Neem Plus, that's very common, and biocidin, and just I could go on. But what do you do? Because I know as a medical herbalist, you tailor your herbal protocols to your patients.
That's right. And I think herbs are amazing because they've co-evolved, with bacteria. So they've got a lot of what we call active constituents or plant metabolites that are part of that makeup of the plant. And plants are in the business of survival, as are bacteria, as are we, so we're always trying to adapt to different changes in the environment. And I think that the bacteria have managed to outsmart a lot of the modern drugs, but certainly plants have seemed to have the upper hand in a lot of ways with that. So We find that there's a much broader action with plants in terms of the antimicrobial effect. And also we've got the methane dominant type thing going on as well. So sometimes I think I looked at some of the research into this and the plants, and certainly from my own case and a few other patients I've had with very stubborn methane dominant, and looking at a lot of the research behind that. So there's specific kind of actions that we look at. There's the herbs that have a lot of flavonoids or saponins or sulfur compounds. So there's different ways that these herbs can target those different bacteria, and we can get really good results with that. So I do tailor it. I think that's what I love about being a herbalist, because I use liquid extracts as well. So mostly what I would use is a personalised kind of formula. So I'll put different herbs together in an alcohol extract formula, and you can play around with that a lot more and really personalise it. So if people have more things going on with stress, for example, as well, then we'll be putting herbs in there that are going to help with that. So I do their own little version. So it's not, I do have, some of my favourite SIBO kind of formulas, but usually I'm adapting those to each person's individual situation. If they've got, and obviously if they've got more, motility issues in terms of the diarrhea dominant, hydrogen dominant versus methane, and the laxative actions needed. So we'll tailor it in that way too. And herbs have that ability to be more broad. We can get herbs that have cross functions. So something like chamomile, for example, also very calming. It's antispasmodic on the gut, but it's also, great for that stress response too. So using some of those herbs that cross different systems is a really great way of prescribing as well.
So if I wanted just to have a cup of chamomile tea, that's not going to cut it, though, is it?
No. Some of the teas can be good. We will get some of the essential oil rich ones, and the essential oils, actually, there's a lot of research on essential oils in terms of some of those plants and animal studies that look at methane particularly as well. Essential oils do have very potent actions in terms of antimicrobials. So they've got things like thyme and oregano are well known for that. But even I've been really using a lot of aniseed and fennel and cinnamon essential oil as well, and they've been really, really effective. So you do need to get the proper tea. Well, you will get a little bit of essential oils out of a tea because they are water soluble as well, and they will extract from that, and that's the nice smell that you get when you make a tea. But when we're wanting medicinal actions, we really need the whole, more concentrated plant extracts, both through either the alcohol-based tinctures or, a tablet form as well.
Do you do any commercial herbal, do you suggest any commercial herbal concoctions or formulations, or you strictly make your...
No, I do both. Yeah, I definitely do both. There's a few brands, obviously in Australia, it's probably a little bit different to the States as well, that there's a few formulas that have been put out. I find the ones that have got essential oils in them with the herbs I like in a capsule form because they're obviously easier to administer. Though I have been playing around with putting essential oils into people's liquids as well and adding that as a little addition. But I do use both. I do find I like to do that staged approach where I might do a formula for a few weeks and then we'll swap it out and do another formula. And I do find herbs work best when we're doing that. And we're trying to outsmart those bacteria, obviously, the whole time as well. Yeah.
So there are a lot of people who are watching this that are in Australia, and I was just wondering if you might drop some brand names so that they could have some guidance in addition to, hopefully reaching out to you for a Skype consult or, but it's nice to know some name brands.
Yeah, and I think in Australia too, a lot of these, they're not available over the counter, so I can definitely share those, but they're not ones that you can get without a prescription from a practitioner. So there's a product called Phytaxil, which is by Biomedica, and I like that. It's got myrrh in there as well, which is a lovely herb for antimicrobial actions. It's got some garlic. So a lot of those classic ones that we look at, and some oregano, thyme, those sort of oils in there as well. So I really like that one. I suppose the berberine containing ones, there's philodendron and golden seal, some those ones just in a straight tablet can be a nice adjunct to other things as well. So there's so many, it's so hard to kind of, give you just a single herb. And the way I work, as I said, it's a lot more individualized. So we're looking at really building a formula that's going to be targeting a specific action. Yeah.
If someone isn't able to come see you for a consultation, what advice would you give anyone who has SIBO, hydrogen or methane or both? I know a lot of people are just, they aren't able to get to a practitioner or there are none in their area, which is why I'm such a huge fan of Zoom and of Skype and these consultations. They're very effective. But if someone is, and I'm not recommending this because I think we should all talk to the medical professionals, if someone was doing a little bit of DIY, do it yourself, what would you suggest for each type?
Well, that's a tricky one because I think in terms of the herbs, as I said, it's hard to get the efficacy from just doing a tea. Obviously, I do a lot in terms of the diet as well. So obviously making sure the diet's spot on and help not feeding those bacteria. But I suppose you could look at, doing something like your berberine containing herbs for either both methane and hydrogen dominant because they are very effective at that. And then looking at probably things like thyme and, as I said, some of those, you can make them in a tea reasonably strongly and effectively. Gentian I really love as well. That's a herb that you can often get. It's a bitter herb. So any of the bitter-containing herbs, bitter-containing foods are fantastic for stimulating the nerve reflex. So when we eat something bitter, we get a strong nerve innervation to the gut to promote that digestive process, both in terms of motility but release of enzymes. So including more bitter foods in their diet is a really great way of just gently stimulating things and improving that. And working on that stress response, as I said as well, is a big one. And that includes sleep. Like I think sleep's one of those one people often forget about. And we know about the difference with the cortisol and the melatonin. So melatonin is a very important, obviously our hormone that helps us sleep, but it's been shown to actually increase gastric secretions, motility, etc. So when we've got good melatonin levels, so that's making sure we're not using screens before bed, all those basic kind of what we call sleep hygiene. So getting that right so that we're optimizing that healing time overnight with the digestive process. So essential. And cortisol being one of those other, or the other hormone that's opposite to that. So I often find if you can use sleep things before bed, so as even a good chamomile tea then, Siobhan, could still help in that respect if it's a nice medicinal quality. Will also help just get into a deeper restful sleep, which allows all those natural mechanisms. I think we've got to remember the body it wants to heal. It's got this innate intelligence to want to heal, and if we support it with the right environment in terms of these holistic strategies, we're getting a lot further than just targeting in a narrow way, like trying to just poke and prod it into sort of behaving. It really needs to be understood in that bigger context of how stress has such an important role to play in healing.
So that's where somebody who doesn't have a serious medical condition, but literally is just having this huge stress response above and beyond our low level even of the fight or flight. And what would be that mechanism? So it would be slowing the motility, and then maybe, I know we're not saying there's a study, this is just your observation, but so then it might impact the migrating motor complex. Do you think that that is the domino effect?
Well, there is some studies actually good, which is great, and not many human ones. There's a lot more on animals which look at stress response. And when I was first trying to discover it, because I had a weird episode where I had a lot of anxiety fairly recently where my SIBO symptoms were basically gone, and it was the exact opposite of what we normally think. We normally think when people are under stress, their symptoms get worse because everything's slowed down. But I had this particular type of stress, which was not my normal busy running around stress, where that does tend to make me a bit worse. But I had this kind of more of an anxiety that I was quite concerned about a loved one. And I had my digestive symptoms went completely, no bloating, didn't matter what I ate, nothing happened. And I was quite intrigued by this because it was completely, as a medical mind and a researcher at heart, I go off into thinking, okay, what's happening here? Why is this happening? And really not understanding it. So I did go and look at a lot of the research into the stress response and what's going on at that real motility digestive level. And as I said, a lot of the studies were on animals. So they were looking at rats and putting them into different stress responses. And they found that there were different types of stresses that had different effects on the gut function. So that was as far as I got to understanding my own one. But what happens is that when we're in a stress response, there's a change in the microbiome composition. So that's a very well-documented thing. So we get different levels of bacteria. And so we get a reduction in some bacteria levels and an increase in others, so that sometimes we get that, that imbalance, I guess you could say, that can drive more of those problematic symptoms. that change in composition also then triggers increase in intestinal permeability. So we get more of a leaky gut sort of scenario, which we know also aggravates a lot of the underlying symptoms. So there's increased inflammation, etc. So they're the two main things. Obviously the microbiome, then that change also influences our physiological state. So we see there's a bidirectional kind of process. So both the bacteria affect how our brain works. You know, they affect our serotonin and dopamine and some of these pathways, which affect motility. So you'd be aware serotonin is important for normal gut motility, probably, I'm assuming. So if the bacteria are affecting how much serotonin we produce, then that affects our mood and our stress state. So it's this kind of feedback. Both our stress state can affect the microbiome levels and the different types, as well as then the changes in that microbiome. Types of different bacteria will then go back and affect our brain and physiology in terms of our mood and behaviour. So it's kind of a really fascinating thing, I think, where we've evolved, you know, with this lovely microbiome that we work together with. But when there's an imbalance there, it has far-reaching effects, you know, across the systems, not just on mood, obviously, as well. But so it's really interesting. They did one study with some Japanese medical students where they gave them a lactobacilli strain and observed them before exam stress, and they found that when they had this lactobacilli casei shirota, I think was the strain, they didn't actually have increased cortisol before the exam stress, and they had a much reduced kind of digestive issue, no lack of motility, etc. So just having this probiotic was thought to be able to attenuate stress. Yeah.
Whoa, that's fantastic. Tell me the name of it again.
It's Lactobacilli casei, C-A-S-E-I, and then the strain is Shirota, S-H-I-R-O-T-A, which is obviously the Japanese strain. So there's so many, as you'd know, probiotics. It's so important to get those specific strains that do certain things. And I think the only other paper I came across recently was also one where they did some military training. So it's trying to find people in stressful responses, you know, that are in more of an acute stress where they can observe what happens with those. And they also found that same thing, that increased permeability in the gut, more inflammation. But they interestingly found over 100 genes were actually modified by the changes in bacteria. So gene responses, and when they put them on, and I think in that other might have been in the other paper where the genes were also changed, the modulation through that probiotic administration. So I think we need a lot more research. It's really in its infancy, you know, in terms of understanding this stress response and what's going on with that. But it's a fascinating area to watch, I think.
Big time. When you're treating people who have SIBO, speaking of probiotics, where do you bring probiotics into the treatment? This is one of the number one questions we get.
It is.
Yeah. What do you think?
It's not an easy question either. And again, I do try to personalise it a little bit because, I don't have a hard and fast rule about it. And I think not everyone's ready for that. I think I don't like introducing them too early because, of course, we're just adding more bacteria into the problem. And we know that SIBO is not necessarily bad bacteria or good bacteria. It's just bacteria in the wrong part of the gut. So adding more in, if we haven't got a good migrating motor complex operating, then we can actually just be compounding that problem. So, but I think that, you know, judicious use of certain probiotics can actually be beneficial. As I've just explained, you know, with that particular strain, there can be things that may well have an overriding effect that can be beneficial. So it's sort of finding that balance, I suppose. I tend to introduce them sort of along the way a little bit as a rule. Once I've got some of the antimicrobials sorted and we're getting some better actions, then I'll pop them in then, you know, usually. But it is one of those things you have to be really careful with. I think you can overdo it. And a lot of people that I've had that have been taking a lot of probiotics with terrible symptoms, and I just think that they weren't contributing in any healthy way. And also, if you're using antimicrobials, it can be a little bit pointless to be dumping all these probiotics in and then be trying to kill off that underlying thing. So it's a little counterproductive at the beginning, in my opinion. Yeah.
When we're talking about stress, what would you say is the number one or couple of the top ways that you deal with stress or treat stress in your patients?
Yeah, so it's again holistic. So we have to, you know, I always like to look at the whole mind-body connection. So looking at meditation and mindfulness and making sure that they're doing things in their own life, their own lifestyle and exercise. You know, those really basic foundations are so important for us to function well. So we need to obviously get that sorted. So that's definitely one of those things to firstly deal with, and getting the sleep right. Now, those foundations of health are so important. But then I would always like to use herbs as a herbalist. I find herbs are such a wonderful tool to help modulate that stress response. So we look at supporting the adrenal function, if that's part of it. We use adaptogens, which are herbs that help adapt to stress. So if we can't reduce someone's stress that they're in, we need to help the body be more effective at dealing with that. So adaptogens are lovely at sort of boosting that stress response efficacy, if you like. But also we look at the nervous system. So things that can help calm the mind, you know, calm the nervous system down. So those very simple herbs that we can use, everything from things like kava, which are great for anxiety, passion flower, lemon balm, chamomile. There's really simple herbs that a lot of people know about, but if you're using them effectively, or, you know, regularly all the time, we get really effective results with calming that. We do get a strong influence on the nervous system when we're working with herbs. So I do like to combine that. So, but I would never give herbs on their own if someone's not dealing with that. So I want to resource everyone really well with how they're going to manage it, what we can do to reduce that. I do teach meditation and mindfulness as well. So often I'll do that in clinic session if we need to. So just really holistically working on across the board to support that. Because the stress, as we know, if we're in a lot of flight or fight and we're not digesting our food well, then we're missing all those important nutrients that allow the body to function. So it's this compounding problem that stress really has to be sort of top-down effect. Yeah.
Stress can be a killer, right? Really. Oh, stress. And when you were talking about what's stressful for some people isn't stressful for others, I used to teach a class on stress management. And the first time I had heard that concept was when I was training to teach that class. And the example was Mario Andretti, I think that's how you pronounce his name, a great race car driver, like getting in the car and doing the Indy race would not be as stressful to him as it would be to me. But
Exactly.
maybe having him teach a yoga class would be much more stressful for him than for me. So that really did broaden my perspective about stress and made me realize that it isn't just this generic condition, but it certainly is. So everything you're saying is so personalized.
That's right. It's very true. And you have to really work out what is that person's stress, you know, what is it that's making them stressed. A lot of people aren't even aware they are stressed. I find people go, oh, and I'll talk about stress and ask them, they'll go, oh, no, I'm fine. And then when you go through their life and you go and you look at how busy they are, and so we sometimes have to reframe it and go, do you feel pressured a lot? Do you feel like, you know, and when you start to reframe it, because stress can be a bit of a dirty word sometimes, you know, where like people don't want to, or everyone's stressed. Well, we all are, but to some extent, yes, that's true. But, you know, you have to be able to also identify when you are and when you're outside your coping mechanisms, and we know the body's under a lot more strain to try and compensate.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I think there's a little bit of shame associated with being stressed and not being able to deal with it. And so I tend to see my friends who say, oh, that they're not stressed. Only when something tragic happens, then they will like acknowledge that they're in a stressful situation. But other than that, they're just all moving at that low level of stress reaction.
Yeah.
So do you do acupuncture by any chance?
No, I don't. I work in a multidisciplinary clinic, though, with 2 acupuncturists, so I often refer for that as well, which can be great. And, even with the acupuncture, both for stress response as well as also stimulating that motility, it's very good. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Do you ever work with rifaximin or any of the prescriptions?
Well, obviously, medical doctors in Australia, as a naturopathic practitioner, I'm not able to prescribe it, but certainly I do feel there's probably a place for it, you know, in certain cases. And I think I'm more inclined would like to do combined antibiotics with herbs, and there's some quite good research to show that herbs can actually enhance the efficacy of antibiotics as well. So that's starting to come out more and more, that we do a combined approach. So, and you're thinking instead of even say, rifaximin in near mice, and I'd like to see, some of the studies that looked at, say, rifaximin plus herbal medicines and that's still, as I said, growing. We need more people to be out there doing this research because I think that we'd get really good results with that. So, yeah, I do feel there's a place in certain cases for doing that. It's one of the better drugs in terms of its not having such a systemic effect on across the board, because we've got to remember herbs as well, even though we kind of think they've got this safe, this much more safe profile, they still can be very potent and will affect the microbiome everywhere, So I've had patients who've had like bacterial vaginosis develop after dealing with the bacteria in the gut, but they've developed, changes in the microbiome of their vaginal flora and then developed infections. So that's like not really what we want to be doing, but that's the fallout effect. So we know the herbs work, but whether we don't always see what's going on in the gut. It's the tricky part. It's inside us. We can't see the effect of stress. If we could see when we under stress or we ate certain foods and we saw that change in the motility, or we saw a change in the permeability of the gut, little enterocytes moving, we'd be more inclined to pay attention. But I think it's such a hidden system that all we're dealing with is looking at the symptoms that we experience in terms of the bloating or the change in bowel movements.
You nailed that. That is an understatement for sure. So if someone is dealing with methane dominant SIBO, do you have any little couple of tips and tricks for that? And then let's talk about the hydrogen type.
Yeah, so I think with the methane dominant, as I said, it's one of the things that I've been really researching because it is stubborn, and most practitioners you speak to will all agree it's the hard one to treat because it doesn't respond as effectively. I think those little methanogens, the archaea bacteria, the ancient little ones, are much more clever at being outsmarted. They're not as easy to kill off. And I think most of the effective treatments that we look at with those, the methane dominant bacteria, the treatments are really killing off the bacteria that are producing the hydrogen, which we know then the methane's driven from. So the herbs that I think are really good there are looking at ones that have the saponins, that are rich in saponins and tannins. So I've been experimenting with different formulas for this methane using things like coarse chestnut, which is in their Trantil product as well, but also combining that with green tea, and gotu kola is another herb that I find quite effective. And then still putting your berberine ones again in. So we're wanting to kind of try and deal with, obviously, the hydrogen-producing bacteria to deal with the methane dominant problem as well, because they've got to work together. And I think a lot of the studies that showed that reduction in methane production was through actually inhibiting the protozoal levels or the bacterial levels of when they look at it in animals, they're looking at the rumen, obviously. So we haven't got as much research, unfortunately, of human studies with that. But we can assume it's a pretty similar effectiveness. So I do find that, methane dominant is trickier in terms of, rifaximin's not that great for dealing with it as well. So we really need to do multiple strategies for the methane dominant. And I think the diet is really important there as well. And it's always tricky, obviously, with diet ongoing, because we're missing out on the prebiotics that are going to feed the good bacteria too. So we can't do the diet for too long without getting that fallout across the board, which we know. So, those herbs I really like. I think that the aniseed and the oregano and thyme are really good for the methane dominant, and also the hydrogen as well.
So for hydrogen, what do you do differently for hydrogen than for the methane?
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, what I'd probably do is more dealing with the herbs that are looking at the diarrhea dominant as well. So we're looking at more astringent and the tannins and things like that. So there's herbs like agrimony and raspberry even, and the green tea again. So the tannin-rich ones are going to help that. And I do find Sucrione is, even though, it's a little controversial because some people do sort of still react to that, I think it's such a lovely, soothing, mucous membrane tonic as well that helps with that, more with that hydrogen dominant. I find if you're using small amounts, sort of, not big amounts, it still has a really good role to play there at healing and soothing that lining, because there's sort of more inflammation, I find, with that hydrogen dominant. It tends to be more of that reactivity and that motility, change.
So do you work at all with the not the microbiome, but with biofilm? at all?
Yes, as well. I do find, again, probably that's where, when you're getting those stubborn cases, I'll introduce more biofilm sort of strategies. I don't have, I trying things. It's, again, very hard to know. We don't get to go in and look at what's happening with the biofilm. We're just assuming it's working or not working based on someone's progression in terms of their symptoms. So it's a little bit of an inexact science, unfortunately. But I do like to use those proteolytic enzymes. I do find the serrapeptase type things quite good as far as I can tell. They're working, and there's some new ones that include, different ones with the nattokinase and different sorts of enzymes mixed in together in a formula. I haven't tried that. I know there's a few ones in the states that some of your colleagues would be using over there, but they're not available here, so I haven't really experimented yet with those. N-acetylcysteine I use a little bit. I'm not overly convinced on its efficacy with that. I do think it's a fantastic across the board. It helps with mopping up a lot of the endotoxins and things like that we get, being such a good, detox agent, I guess, through the whole system. So it's a great little supplement to use, but I'm not sure how effective it is on the biofilm.
And so I ask everybody this next couple of questions.
Yeah.
What do you think about coffee?
Okay. It's tricky, coffee, because, again, it's quite personal and how well you metabolize it. And we know there's a genetic variable there too with our caffeine through that phase 1 pathways of the liver. So some people are more sensitive than others. So I personally don't drink it. So I've never drunk it. So it's one of those things I joke with my patients. It's like, well, I never had to give it up. So, I'm a little bit of a different category. I don't quite understand the addiction. And we have a very big caffeine coffee culture in Australia. But I think up to 1 cup a day, that's my limit. I don't like people drinking more than 1 cup a day. But obviously, for some methane dominant patients, the caffeine, having that bitter coffee stimulation often gets the bowel moving as well. So there is that laxative effect that can happen with caffeine. So if that's happening and I want to get them off coffee, then I'll look at replacing that with some herbal bitters and things, even dandelion root, things like that have that bitter reflex, again, as I was talking about earlier, can stimulate that bowel. Which is a good thing. And, it is a stimulant. So when people are stressed, we don't really need more caffeine to rev them up. So if they're exhausted, I want to try and fix the energy from, a deeper perspective rather than just propping them up with caffeine. So it's got to all be understood in the context of what it's doing for each person, I guess.
We just have a few more minutes, but I wanted to ask you, when it comes to herbs, what do you do for people who have constipation? They need to go, right? So they need to eliminate these toxins. Do you do like Cascara Sagrada? That's big here in the States.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah, I do. I love Cascara. I find it's really great. I usually do a little combination. I find rhubarb is good as well. And that also has some other nice benefits. As I was saying, a lot of the time we're using herbs with they're having other benefits. So it's also got the tannins and things as well. But yes, I like Cascara. I like butternut as well. I tend to use something like a dandelion. And often when I'm using a laxative action, because I know we do need to get things moving, but we want to make sure the bowel's not getting lazy, because obviously that's part of, encouraging. We don't want to entrain the bowel to need that stimulation. We're trying to fix that. But there's definitely a place for it. And often I'll have patients have a little formula and they can just use it sort of as needed rather than having it all the time. But I find also putting something in there like some chamomile or maybe lemon balm in there, which has that spasmolytic action, just can help with that griping effect sometimes with those anthraquinone glycosides that are more stimulating on the bowel. So that laxative action can be a bit harsh. So we'll often put in a few things to just modify that a little bit and soften the approach on the bowel. So we're getting a more of a broad action. But there is definitely a place for it, yeah.
And so if someone has diarrhea, do you have an herb that you usually recommend for that? Again, maybe not every single day, but on demand.
Yeah. I like agrimony. That's one of the herbs that I use a lot of. We also have things like angelica and, again, raspberry leaf. So those tannin-type rich herbs can be really good, along with those calming ones. So we always want that antispasmodic action. Those things like chamomile, again, very good antispasmodic, very good anti-inflammatory. So it's just going to soothe that musculature down, help it from getting into that spasmodic kind of reactivity as well. And then things like your cyprium, as I said, that just helps to kind of bulk up the stool a little bit and soften, helping with that watery, inflamed kind of irritation through the bowel. So again, it's a little bit personalised. We'll kind of mix and match a bit to see how people go with different formulas. Iberogast is one of the ones, we do use here a lot as well, and it's kind of quite a nice little go-to that people can still, get over the counter more or less. I do find quite effective. It's not great when it's more of a serious thing. I find you need more than just that, but it's quite nice, particularly after a SIBO treatment protocol, using that as just a gentle daily kind of tonic effect. I think it's good.
A lot of people ask if they can be on Iberogast like forever if they need. Yeah. What do you think about that?
Look, I think it is a very gentle mix. I think there's no harm in being on that. I think if we look at a lot of the European cultures where they're using digestive tonics, most days they have their aperitifs and then they have the digestivo, like it's that thing where we're stimulating and supporting the digestive function. So it's always a good thing. I think it's different to enzymes. I'm not mad on people being on enzymes long term because, again, it's like a hormone replacement sort of option. We're really wanting to fix that underlying problem and allow them to make their own enzymes. But if things like herbs that are just helping to calm and generally support the digestive process, like Iberogast, I think you can be on reasonably, long term without too much problem. I've got patients who've used it a long time and they don't seem to have any problems with that. It is like a low dose kind of herb. Like I would give probably much bigger doses if I'm using herbs a lot of the time. So it's like a safe option and lovely in kids too. I treat a lot of kids as well. So it's quite palatable, easy for them to take, and even infants, we use it in colic and those early digestive problems with reflux, etc.
So what other prokinetics are you a fan of other than Iberogast?
Yeah, I find I really like ginger. That's probably my favourite. I do find that. And Terminalia is another one. So that's probably, you might know that as the Triphala. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so that's got a Terminalia compound in there, and that's quite good for it being a prokinetic as well. So I usually use a combination, again, trialling different ones. I do quite like Motopro. With the ginger in there and that little bit of the 5-HTP, I think is also just helping with those hormone productions as well. So all that's neurotransmitters. So they're the main ones. We use gentian and ginger together a lot in Australia. So it's often gentian being that bitter compound. So we're getting that nice nerve stimulation on the gut as well as then the prokinetic action of the ginger. So they're often used in combination.
How do you spell gentian?
Gentian. So it's Gentian. So it's Gentiana lutea is the Latin name, Gentiana, but gentian, yes, it's common name. So I don't hear a lot of other people talking about it so much, but I really love putting that. And because it is a very strong bitter, I'll often put it in formulas. I'll put a little bit of gentian and ginger into, with those other herbs, and it's a lovely way of just stimulating that bit more of good enzyme output and some of that motility support, yeah.
Well, I know it's very early in the morning there, and you are a wealth of information, and so I really appreciate you waking up so extra early so that you could share your expertise with us. We really appreciate it, and be well. Thank you for all the help that you're giving to us and all of your patients. Any parting thoughts for anybody with SIBO out there?
I think I'd just say, keep your stress under control and get to learn and love some herbs. I think that's my take-home message. Give them a go because there's some great things there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doctor.
With pleasure. Thank you.